episode of our Block Break Conversations. We are excited to sit down virtually with three campus leaders whose work focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion at CC. This past summer, Penny Fagan joined the CC community as the new Senior Associate Dean for Equity, Inclusion, and Faculty Development. Rosalie Rodriguez joined us as the Senior Associate Dean of Students for Equity and Inclusion and Director of the Butler Center. Additionally, Barbara Wilson, who has been at the college since 2000, is serving as the Interim Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for staff. Why don't we just go ahead and start our conversation? I was so looking forward to this. And maybe, Rosalie, why don't you answer first for us, and then Penny and Barbara, feel free to jump in. I believe this week in Inside Higher Education, there was an article about the importance of diversity and racial equity in the academy. I would just love to hear your thoughts on why this is so critical for the academy now and how it positions us for the future.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Edmonds, for that introduction. I think, as we know, currently higher ed does not look the same way it did 100 years ago, 50 years ago, even 10 years ago. In terms of compositional diversity, we have much more first-generation students, much more students of color attending college and university. And the institutions that we attend right now, we're not built with these populations in mind. So this is really a critical conversation for any university to be having about our sustainability long-term and whether we continue to provide the services and a strong liberal arts education to a population that looks and feels and is accessing higher education very differently than how we once imagined it in many of the ways that our institutions were built. The resources and services that we provided to those students years ago, and what we need to do to make sure that we continue to be able to serve those populations 50 years from now, just as a matter of course, but also as a matter of justice, and making sure that access is open to communities that have long been shut out of those conversations, who are now present and here knocking on our doors.
Great. Barbara, Penny, would you like to add to Dean Rodriguez's thoughts?
Sure. I first want to say thank you to both you and President Moore for inviting us to this conversation. And that's such an important question in terms of, why. And just to build on what Rosalie said, it's also a part of educational excellence. Most colleges and universities want to engage in providing, the best or the, most excellent educational experience for students, but needing to couple best practices in diversity, equity, inclusion with what it means to provide an excellent educational experience. And tying those two together, I think is really, really critical.
So, Barbara, you've been at the college longer than I have. And I believe at one time you served as the co-chair of the Diversity Equity Advisory Board, known affectionately as DEEB. So could you talk about how the efforts of the three of you are going to coordinate, support, and work with our existing DEEB organization?
I'd be glad to. And actually, I was a member of the DEEB. I've had other roles that focused on diversity and inclusion for faculty and staff where I did co-chair. So for those who do not know, DEEB stands for Diversity Equity Advisory Board. They've been in existence for, I'm going to say, at least 6 years. They replaced two other longstanding committees, Women's Concerns Committee and Minority Concerns Committee. And the DEEB, as we call them, their role was enhanced to serve as an advisory to the president and to the cabinet on all matters that pertain to diversity and equity for faculty and staff. And so we already have that structure in place. And now with the DEI leadership, the implementation of the anti-racist plan, we're working, serving as ex officios on the DEEB. And we've already made some strides this year. Some activities, for example, with Peony's, Dr. Fagan's expertise, the DEEB, the group, review faculty job descriptions, and we're looking at them through a DEI lens, certainly from the guidance from Peony. We're starting to now have conversations to do the same or similar with our staff positions, which have a different flavor to them. But again, looking at the core communication as it pertains to diversity, because we're recognizing in order to attract a diverse applicant pool, we need to say upfront who we are, what we believe in, and that we are an anti-racist institution. So therefore, we need to show front and center in those advertisements. So we're doing that. The plan, by the way, will also have the creation of an oversight committee. So there will be another body. And so we're talking with DEEB, defining roles and responsibilities as we transition in this next year. So they're actively engaging in those conversations. And by the way, DEEB is made up of faculty and staff. And there's even conversations that in the future where we have a student representative. So of course, those conversations are have been very good. We're looking at our equal employment opportunity statement that's been in existence for probably 40, 50 years. And what should that say now and where does that belong? So we're starting to have conversations there. On my side, I'm working more on the staff focus. So starting to work with human resources, again, looking at the recruitment practices, looking at the EEO statement, looking at our staff handbook. I think part of the implementation of the plan will be to focus on our policies and practices that are very ingrained systemic racism and discrimination. And so we need to take that apart and look at all those. So that's an area right now that we're focusing on.
Earlier, I mentioned that we were asked and we accepted the invitation to join with other top liberal arts colleges to look consortially at the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm excited about that. I'm curious if you're as excited as I am about that. And Dean Fagan, I can see you on the screen, so why don't you just chime in with that?
Yeah, thank you for that question, President Edmonds. I'm really excited about it for a number of reasons. First off, I think it's critically important for liberal arts institutions to have this space because I think liberal arts institutions have particular kinds of challenges when it comes to DEI and isms. Historically, liberal arts schools have been more elitist. There's been less access to them by folks from diverse backgrounds, as opposed to, let's say, in contrast to public universities. So I think there's particular challenges that liberal arts institutions face, and many still remain predominantly white. That's just a fact. So what does it mean to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work and anti-racist work in a predominantly white setting? And I think it's really exciting for liberal arts institutions to not have to do this work separately, siloed. We know that, being able to exchange information and ideas will help us progress faster among liberal arts institutions. So I think it's really exciting. And also, they're providing every month an opportunity to engage in 3-hour-long professional development workshops centering on a variety of topics on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they're allowing member institutions to send up to 8 folks from those institutions. And I know for me, I believe it's critically important that we build capacity on campus, that this sort of work and skill sets are not specific to particular people on campus, that the more we can kind of spread people's ability, increase people's opportunity to develop DEI competencies. And so this will help us do that, because we won't have to necessarily do all of that in-house. And as Rosalie, Barbara, and Barbara know, developing DEI workshops is not easy, and it's challenging, and it's time consuming. So I'm really excited about the opportunity of a variety of people across campus, depending on their roles, having an opportunity to engage in quality professional development opportunities. And I also will finally say that they really sort of gave some thought to making sure a variety of folks at institutions have an opportunity to engage in conversation, including presidents of these institutions. So they also are creating spaces for presidents to come together to kind of talk about DEI best practices and approaches and challenges. And so there's a lot that they're offering. So I'm so happy that we've become a member.
Wonderful, wonderful.
May
So as
I
we think
expand-
about, go ahead, Barbara.
May I expand upon that? Because I too got excited and looked and navigated through their website. And the Center for Urban Education is associated with the Alliance.
Correct.
And they have a wealth of resources, equity tool training guides. So I've already started navigating through there. They had a video on unconscious bias, again, within our higher education environment. I can go out, we looked at other places which are more corporate level, but this will be pertinent to the classroom and to the higher education setting. So there definitely will be a wealth of information for the training piece, because people are looking to us saying, oh, you're going to be the trainers now at Colorado College. No, there's much more work than being the trainer, as Peony mentioned.
So speaking of the work, I want to ask Rosalie about this. When I describe to other folks how we have chosen to organize at Colorado College, they go, 3 people? Don't you have a single person in charge of this? I try to explain to them, no, we've taken a different approach. So I want you to help me answer questions from others, why we don't have a single person and why this may be a better approach.
You should just respond that 3 heads are better than 1.
All right, I'll just do that. That's a simple answer, right?
A simple answer.
Right.
This structure was honestly one of the really key elements for me in considering Colorado College and considering moving into this type of position. I had held a chief diversity officer position prior, and the expectations and the reality of trying to be everything to everyone is really not sustainable. I think there is something to be said, absolutely, and I really appreciate the different expertise that each of us bring to this model and the ability for us to speak to different issues that we each have expertise and knowledge of the background. I think there is something else to be said that we rarely talk about: sustainability of folks who do DEI work and the fact that they do not stay in the field for very long, and the expectations of us kind of showing up in all of these spaces and doing all of the work, falling on one person's shoulders, is part of that reason. It's just an untenable faction. And it's a model that is often developed in consideration of much larger schools that have broad structure of folks reporting to them that can go out and do the workshops among various departments and bring in different expertise. When we're talking about a school the size of Colorado College, the school that I was a chief diversity officer, it was a similar size, a little bit smaller, but I was teaching classes in service learning and cultural analysis. I was also leading student programming, running pre-orientation programs, leading up some of the things that Barbara was just talking about in terms of looking at all of our job descriptions for faculty and staff, leading the training to teach them how to build in anti-bias lens into their practices as we're reviewing these. It's entirely too much. And the place where I could never make inroads, which it was in the curriculum, because I wasn't faculty and I wasn't coming from a faculty background. And that's such an important piece of that pie, that with the three of us being able to have different expertise, being able to bring in those different lenses, and to really have some authenticity of a lived experience working in these different realms, we're going to be able to make inroads and make changes much more quickly, much more authentically, and in a way that feels like it is co-created with folks who understand each of those different fields, rather than a figurehead kind of telling everyone else, this is what you need to be doing, that we're able to work with everyone in the various departments together on something that feels good to all of us combined.
We all know that we've all been stressed and tried by the pandemic. And we know that the pandemic affects different communities differently. I would just like to hear your thoughts about how equity, anti-racism, and COVID have just intersected on our own campus. We know we're not a bubble. If it's happening out in the world, it's also happening at CC. We know that we've had many alums, parents, and our students set up aid funds to help our community who are impacted and struggling because of the pandemic. But I would love to get all of your thoughts on how those things are really intersecting in real time now in the world and also on our campus. Dr. Fagan.
So there's so many aspects to this question, but I'll focus on the teaching and learning dimension of it. From those who are teaching, there's a lot of adaptation that's had to occur. Also, sort of navigating teaching when you have students with differential access to internet, who have various kinds of working environments that either impede or support being able to engage in a Zoom class because you're sort of having to carve out your space in a small home with siblings or extended family. There's also, students who are, trying to do their schoolwork and engage in their academics, who have to do it from homes that, may not be optimal in terms of being violent or not having, adequate money to put food on the table, and so they're hungry. There's all kinds of ways in which this has affected students, but then affecting students and how they're engaging in their academics. And then faculty having to navigate and support students from a variety of backgrounds, not unlike when you're in person, but there's this extra layer of challenge that some students are faced. And faculty, having to carve out extra time to talk with students and support students, outside of the class to help them sort of get through. Certainly also in concert with other resources, on campus. But the COVID has presented these very real challenges. And we know nationwide it has unveiled sort of inequities in ways that they were there before, but we didn't see them in the same way. So that we are ever more cognizant of the way in which broadband is just not available as widely as we might have thought in rural areas, and that what that has in terms of an impact of access to then being able to attend virtual classrooms. So that's sort of bringing it to outside of CC, but the way in which it's revealed to us, these inequities, it's good, but at the same time, it's overwhelming the level of inequity that we're seeing, that certainly some of us have known about, but it's on a whole nother dimension. And hopefully we can make inroads, in addressing them and not turning a blind eye.
I will follow up with that and say there's a saying that's been going around probably longer than the pandemic has started in student affairs circles, but certainly has resurfaced, which is that students need to Maslow before they can bloom. And it's a reference to two really important theories of student development. One is a Maslow's hierarchy of basic needs, right? And the other is Bloom's taxonomy about how we learn and how we increase our level of learning, starting from like regurgitating information to kind of developing and internalizing your own ideas before you get to that self-actualization where you can start creating your own type of learning and sharing that out with others. And I think all of us really want to exist in that kind of Bloom's level, right? Even in student affairs, we center so much of the work that we do in that progression of moving students from this space where they're just regurgitating ideas, but applying what they're learning in the classroom to their clubs, to their organization, to their work with each other, so that they can start to create these things. And we're sending them off as leaders who are able to do these things on their own. But the reality of the pandemic is that we've had to really move back into making sure that Maslow's hierarchy, those basic needs are met. And before we can get to any of the learning at all, if students, as Peony already mentioned, are not eating, are not having a safe home environment to be in, then they're not going to be able to get to self-actualization. Now, I mean, sometimes being able to even regurgitate information is a challenge. And so I think all of us needing to shift some of our expectations to be gentle with ourselves as well as with our students about what we can accomplish in this moment. And sometimes it is enough to show up into a space and to be there and to listen to a student and what concerns they have to help them, if we can, access and close some of those gaps in terms of access to resources, both on and off campus. I've had a number of conversations with students, and in the Butler Center, obviously, we're working with more marginalized students than the general population might show. If students are home, they're staying home, but students who are here are not going home for a Thanksgiving break, and many of them are not going home for a holiday break longer term, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, any of those things that are coming up. It's just not feasible and tenable for them to do those things. So when we get to these longer break periods, we'll start to see that exasperation in access. Right now, we're seeing some increase in COVID numbers, which is making moving around for everyone more difficult. But folks that have means can find ways around that. Parents coming to visit instead of students going home. That's not something that's available to everyone. And so I think for us right now in student affairs and student life, making sure that we are attentive to those basic needs in that Maslow's hierarchy, but also, tending to just the interpersonal level and being there and showing up and providing that family, that connection that I think many of us are missing right now as we're all kind of in these virtual environments and isolated in ways that are not healthy over long periods of time for any of us, but certainly for students in this really critical phase of development.
Thank you.
And if I can just add, as from the workforce side, Dr. Edmonds, when you spoke about Colorado College is just like the rest of the nation. We have many frontline workers who have to be here in order for the college to continue to operate. And the majority of them, I'm going to say, are hourly paid employees. And that's where I'm going to make a general statement. Many people of color and women are in those positions. And yet they're critical. They are here. They're committed to their job. And yet they're also leaving home of children that they have. So there is that intersection when we start talking about the pandemic with race. And I'll even say gender. And without going into a lot of detail, there's even the pay equity issues. And the college has been looking at that. I just found out recently, there was a study recently on the faculty side. Human Resources has stated that they will look at pay equity on staff positions. On January 1, the Colorado Equal Pay for Equal Work Act goes into place. And CC, we're already starting to look at what adjustments do we need to make in order to ensure equal pay. I'll also share, because I'm very, proud that we do work for an employer. We've been able to continue to keep our benefit eligible employees in a paid status. We've had voluntary furloughs. We've made some adjustments, but we've been able to proceed down that path. We have both of you as co-presidents. You're very aware of disparate impact and the inequities. So we have these conversations. We're aware of our policies and practices. There's some other benefits that I think that's worth mentioning. There's the Colorado Health, Families, and Workforce Act. It was passed in July, and this act requires all employees to be provided up to 2 weeks of paid sick leave based on related to COVID. And so Human Resources has been doing that, and that act has been utilized. On our own at Colorado College, we recently announced, it probably was September when we announced this, a temporary benefit of what we call relief for full-time, hourly, and exempt employees. And by the way, I was very pleased that you even included exempt. Some of us say, well, because we're salaried, we have some flexibility to provide relief, and that's not necessarily the case right now. So this is time off between now and December 31. It's 6 half-paid days of paid leave, separate from what someone else, whatever you may have for sick leave or vacation accrual. And I think that's important that we're recognizing that mental health that Rosalie, alluded to for our students. And both co-presidents, you keep reiterating to our staff, we need to be able to step back and take care of ourselves. I also talk to the supervisors who report to me, have some empathy and understanding with your employees. Know what's going on in their lives. Understand this is a stressful time. Support them. And convey that support, right? It makes such a difference. Many of us are at our jobs because of the people that we work for and we work with. And I think that's been an advantage here at Colorado College.
So I'm afraid we're about to run out of time, but I have to inquire about how the three of you formed a team. I think it's obvious to people who watch you work and interact that you support each other, you understand each other. One of the challenges we face in life is, how do we form teams? How do we get to know? How do we work together? So Barbara, I'm going to pick on you first, since you're the CC person. How did the three of you go about deciding that you were going to be a team, that you're going to share and work together, and you were comfortable in that?
I'll speak for myself. I stepped into it with that objective. And that expectation. We believe in the work that we do, and I know I will be partners. And how can I support them and understand their ways and their needs, and most importantly, probably their talents. These are two phenomenally very experienced subject matter experts. I know I don't like to use the word experts in this field, and there's just a high regard. We give each other time. We listen to each other. We understand our backgrounds. And because I've been here the longest, at times I've been able to provide some past historical context of practices, of people, of the way we go about things. But it's also refreshing to hear new ideas. And I think that's also what makes a team successful. Let's hear new ideas.
I will chime in here. I have had the luxury of coming to CC, having been part of a 3-person team at my previous institution, a 3-person DEI team that worked really effectively. So I came in so enthusiastic to be part of another 3-person team. I really saw how kind of dividing the work up, how beneficial it was to each of us. Hearkening back to what Rosalie said about the challenges with a CDO position. And so I came in with that experience and wanted to replicate that and kind of have a sense of how to make a 3-person team, work. And part of that is, there has to be synergy. There has to be a way in which we, like Barbara said, really understand each of our skill sets. understand sort of also the challenges as we work with each of our constituents, and honoring that, the specific challenges that relate to working with faculty, with students, with staff. And I think also just a kindness and an understanding that operates between us is so critical. And it's gotten to a point that if we attend a meeting where one of us can't be there, it feels really strange. It feels like something's missing, right? Because we've created this sort of bond in how we do this work, which is challenging work, but it also does lend itself to bonding because of how challenging it is and the particular kind of topics and issues we have to take up. So I can speak from, my experience in terms of past and then the way in which I wanted to replicate that. And it's far exceeded my expectations, even in just the short time we've worked together.
I would so echo that part about feeling like a part is missing, where in meetings, I think sometimes one of us is not there, I'm not expecting to see someone else. I'm like, oh, I'm so glad you're here, Barbara. I didn't know you were going to be here. Like, it's especially as a new person, it's a level of familiarity and knowing that your support system is there to back you up. I think Barbara, I came into this really excited and knowing that this was going to be, I was going to be a part of a team that would be working together. And I don't think I've really ever thought about it as three silos or three different positions, but three people who are going to be working together to lead this effort. And I think throughout my career, I have found that I have grown the most and I have been at my best when I've had other folks who are experts in the same work that we're doing, being there to challenge me and to support me both, to let me know when, maybe an idea that I have needs a little bit more thought, needs a little bit more vetting before we move forward with it, or, just say, you're on the right track. I completely agree with you and I have your back. And that I've always been at my best when I've had that equal challenge and support, which I've definitely felt right out of the gate with the Barbara and Peony both. And so I've been exceedingly grateful. I think somebody mentioned that we seem like an odd team, three very different personalities. But I think all of us would agree that it has been working really well so far.
Well, I just want to close by saying thank you. The work that you do, the work that you've chosen for your professional career is so important to CC. It's important to our mission. It's important to our students, faculty, alumni, our entire community. And it's just great to have you in place as a team. And it's great for you to be providing the leadership for the college as we move forward. And it's have a great block break and do some self-care. Take some time out for yourself because the work you do is quite important and you give of yourselves so often and so passionately. So thank you for joining us tonight and thank you for what you do for CC.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
It was a great time together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.